Hello and welcome to Skills and Automation. My name is Ash and today I'm excited to share a simple, useful and time-saving macro. We are going to look at how to extract attachments from Outlook messages saved on your local drive. Imagine you or someone in your team receives high volume of emails every day filled with invoices or statements or PDFs or what have you. Extracting and saving attachments manually from Outlook emails is like peeling an orange. One is fine, maybe even two, but try doing like 100 at one go. It will get very tiresome very fast. And doing it manually leaves you open to errors. Suppose you miss saving an attachment which is an invoice. What is the risk of that? You may not pay that invoice until you receive a reminder from the vendor. So we need a better alternative which is fast, reliable, and frankly, quite fun to build and execute. And that better alternative is this macro which we are going to build. What is the number one feature of this macro? We will not be directly connecting to our Outlook mailbox. Instead, we will simply save the Outlook messages in a folder on our computer, connect to those messages via the macro, and then extract the attachments. What is the advantage of this? We are not directly messing with a live mailbox. In a work setting, your emails are critical. If you are a beginner, we don't want to accidentally make a change to any of our live emails that we cannot undo. Working with offline messages is way safer. These messages are just a copy of the original messages. You can almost stop thinking of them as emails. Rather, just think of them as regular Excel files containing sheets that we are going to loop over. If we accidentally delete them while testing, no problem. We have a backup in a live mailbox. This is my preferred way of working with received Outlook messages. Minimize the risk, and as a beginner, it is very safe to experiment and learn. This video consists of 3 sections where each section will be built on top of the previous one. We will first have a look at 3 demos for each section and later build the code for those sections. First is a vanilla version where we'll just plain extract all attachments into a folder on our computer drive. Second, we will tweak the file name of the attachment slightly while pasting them to avoid errors with duplicate names. Third, we will look at a more complete package. There is a bit of error handling and we will build a report where we note down all the attachments that were successfully extracted and also highlight the ones that failed. Great. Let's now move on to demo 1. Let's take a look at our folder first. This is our macro file called Outlook Extractor. Our macro will run from any folder. The condition here is that there must be a subfolder called in and another subfolder called out in the same folder location as the macro. The flow is straightforward. We will place the Outlook emails in the in folder, run the macro, and the attachments will get extracted in the out folder. Both folders are empty now. Let's open the macro file. There is one sheet here and 3 buttons which are connected to the code for each demo. Let's go to our Outlook mailbox. There's a folder here called demo 1. Let's inspect the emails. There are a few emails with PDF attachments, a few with CSV files, and one with a mix of PDF attachments and CSV file. Let's select all the emails, copy, come to our folder, go to the in folder, and paste them in here. There. Copying and pasting Outlook messages is a breeze. Now let's go to our macro and run code 1. We get a done message. Click OK. Let's go to our Outlook out folder. We can see a bunch of files that got extracted. We can see both PDF and CSV files here. This macro will however work for any file extension. Let's move on to demo 2 now. The previous demo will run into an issue when the attachment names are not unique. In such a case, the macro will break and give an error message telling us that we can't save a file with the same name in the same folder. To get around this, we can add a unique prefix to each attachment as it's being saved. Let's have a look at an email message in our demo2 folder. There are two attachments here with the same file name. Let's copy and paste this message in our in folder. Let's run the macro, code 2 this time. Done. Let's inspect the out folder to see what got extracted. We can see each file name got saved with a unique prefix. You can see file 001 and file 002 at the start of each file name. Great. This macro is now good to work on its own as a standalone macro. But we could go a step further and add some error handling and a success report in demo 3. See you there. I've already placed a few files here in the in folder. We can see that there's a non-email message here as well. This macro will ignore trying to open it, but it will still record it in a report. Let's come to our main sheet. We will create an error report in columns G to I. Let's run the macro, code 3 this time. Done. Great. We can see a detailed report of what got extracted. There was one file which did not have any attachments. We can see the PDF file mentioned here as well. Column I even says that it wasn't an Outlook message. For the rest of the files, we can see which attachment got extracted from which Outlook message. If you're expecting to use this macro for extracting invoices or something important that you want to keep a record of, this information would be very useful and you would never miss a file or an invoice. And let's go to our out folder as well just to confirm. All our files have been extracted. We have prefixes at the start of every file. We can see a mix of PDF, CSV, and even a picture file in the attachments that were extracted. Let's move on to our code now. Okay, hope you were intrigued by the demos. Let's build the macro now. Let's come to our folder. There are no macro files or subfolders out here. First, we will create two folders called in and out. Now let's go to Outlook and paste the messages from demo 1 into the in folder. Select all the Outlook messages, right click copy, come to the in folder, right click, paste. Our goal is to create a macro that will extract attachments from all the Outlook messages in the in folder and paste the attachments in the out folder. Let's open a blank Excel file. Let's save this file in the same folder where the in and out folders are located. We will call it Outlook Extractor, and I'm going to save this as a .xlsp file. Click Save. Let's inspect our folder. So now we have our in folder, our out folder, and our macro file in the same location. Let's go back to Excel. Hit Alt F11 and open the VBA editor. Let's create a new module and rename it to Demo1. Insert module. Rename this. Notice I have my option explicit turned on. Now let's declare some module level constants. We should avoid hard coding any values where we can, and it's always a good idea to declare fixed values as constants at the top so that it's simple to identify and change them when needed. In our case, the constants are the in and out folder names. This will be a string. And another one for the out folder. Next, we need to do some prep work. We need to be able to connect to the Outlook application in order to extract attachments. And we also need to connect to the Windows file system so that we can loop over the various files. Both these are external libraries and we need to add a reference to it so that we can access its methods and properties. Let's do that. Go to Tools, References, scroll down until you see Microsoft. Next, look for Outlook. Here, Microsoft Outlook 16.0 Object Library. Your version may be different. Select the version that's available to you. Next, look for Scripting Runtime. Found it. This will give you access to the file system. Tick that as well. Okay, that's done. Now, let's create our macros. Let's go sub and call the first one extract emails demo1. First, let's try and avoid the screen fluttering. For that, we can set the screen updating to false and turn it back on once we are done. So let's go application dot screen updating. Set this to false. So this will appear at the start of the macro. Let's select and copy this and place 1 before we exit the macro and turn this back on to true. Next, we need to identify the folder path where our macro is saved. The in and out folders are subfolders within this path. Let's declare a variable to hold the folder path of our macro. We will call it current folder. So dim current folder. This will be a string. We can get the folder path of our current workbook using activeworkbook.path. So we'll set this variable to the activeworkbook.path. And let's add a backslash to that. Next, let's create a new instance of the file system object so that we can access the folder, loop over the Outlook messages, and copy over the attachments. Declare the variable dim. We'll call it FSO as we'll call the scripting library. And this will be a file system object. And let's set it as a new instance of the file system object. So set FSO equals to new scripting file system object. We're not done yet. So what are we going to do with this FSO object? We need to be able to access the in folder and loop over the files. For that, we need to create a new instance of the folder object. Let's do that. Let's declare a variable to hold the folder object. Dim. We'll call it Outlook in. Again, access the scripting library. And this time we select folder. Let's now create a new instance of the in folder. We can use the get folder method and supply the full folder path. Let's set this variable. Copy this down. Equals to, call the FSO object, use the get folder method. Now this requires a folder path as a string, and our folder path is the main folder path, which is the current folder. Copy this and join it to the in folder. So to join, we will use the ampersand and we'll call the constant from right on top out here. If you just want to confirm what this statement looks like, let's debug print this. Control C. Let's go debug print and paste. And let's see what that returns. Run the macro. So this is our current folder path where the macro is saved. And this is us calling the in subfolder. Let's delete the statement off. Now let's go to our Outlook library. Let's create a new instance of the Outlook object. We'll call it OApp. It'll be in the Outlook library. And select application. Now let's set it as a new Outlook application. So set OApp equals to new Outlook application. Now let's declare a mail object to access the Outlook messages and declare an attachment object to access the attachments. So dim, first the mail, again the Outlook library. For the mail, we'll use mail item. We'll do a similar thing for attachment. And we select attachment. We will assign these on the go when we are looping over the files, which brings us to the next part. Let's use the for each statement to loop over the saved messages in the in folder. For that, first we need to dim a file object. We'll call it file item as a file in the scripting library. Now for the loop, we'll do a for each file item in what? In all the files in the in folder. So in our in folder, which is this variable right here. And we want to loop over all the files within this folder. Let's close the loop first. Now we need VBA to recognize that the files saved here are Outlook messages. So we'll recreate the email template from the create item from template method. Let's do that. So set the OMail object. We will use our OApp Outlook instance and select the create item from template method. So it's asking for a path of the file. So what is the file path? It is nothing but the path of the Outlook message. In this instance, it will be the file item dot and just path. This statement allows us to connect to the Outlook message that's saved in our folder. Now we need to be able to loop through each attachment in the folder. For that, we need another for each statement. So let's do that. For each, we'll use the attachment variable that we declared out here. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to loop over each attachment in our OMail object. OMail dot attachments. And let's close this loop as well. So let's consider what we've done out here. We've created a main loop to loop through each of these saved Outlook messages. And we have created another sub loop to loop through each of the attachments within each saved message. Let's close this. Go back to our code. Let's create a variable to hold the file name of the attachment. We need to first declare it outside the loop. Let's do that. Dim. We'll call it attach name as a string. Now let's assign it to the attachment that we are currently looping over. We'll access the attachment object and get the file name property. This will give us the file name of the attachment, but it will not have a folder path attached to it. So let's do that. Now we want to assign the full folder path of where we are going to save this attachment. We're extracting the attachment from the in folder. We want to save it in the out folder. So let's add the Outlook out folder to the full file path. So our same variable name again. First our main folder path. Control C, paste this here. Join it to the name of our destination subfolder, which is the out folder. Copy this. Add a backslash and add the file name. So now that we have the file name, we can save it in the out folder. We'll use the save as file method. And save as what? Save as the attachment name. I've spelled this wrong. Let me correct that. Control C. Paste it here. And this will repeat for each attachment in the email message. Since we will be looping over multiple email messages, let's save the mail item to nothing before we loop over to the next message. So after the next statement, we will set the OMail object to nothing. And that's it for this code. Let's just add a message box which says done when the macro has finished running. Message box just says done. And finally, let's add a button on this page which calls the main sub procedure. Come to our developer tab, insert a button from a form control. Create the button here, and we will call the demo1 macro. Click OK. Rename this to code1. Great, that's it. Before we run this code, let's just confirm that there's nothing in the out folder. There's nothing sitting out here. Good. Go back to our Excel file. Let's run this code and see if there are any errors. We get the done message. That's a good sign. Let's go to the out folder. Awesome. I can see a whole bunch of attachments here. Looks good. You can use this macro as is in the simplest form, but it will run into an issue when we try to extract attachments from the same file name. Let's try that. We'll delete off the emails and the extracted attachments first. Delete our messages. I'm just going to paste one message here. Let's open this file. We can see that there are two attachments, both with the same file name. Let's try and run our code1 macro and see what we get. We get our done success message, but I'm pretty sure there is an issue. Let's click OK. Let's go to the out folder. We can see only one attachment. Depending on your computer, the behavior may be different. Sometimes you may get an error saying that you cannot save an attachment with the same file name. We can't afford for the loop to skip over any attachments. So we need to address this issue. We will do that in the next section. Let's move on to code 2, where we'll add a unique prefix to each attachment file. Let's create a new module. We'll call it demo2. Let's copy over the same code from the previous section here. But we can change the subname to demo2 so that we can call it uniquely from our main worksheet. Now adding this tweak for the unique prefix will be very easy, but I'll need to explain a bit first. So what's our issue? The macro wasn't able to handle attachments with the same file name. To solve this, let's add a unique identifier to the start of the file name. So suppose you have two files called invoice.pdf. I'll just write these here in Notepad. And our second file is also called invoice.pdf. We can modify the file names while saving by adding a prefix with a counter on it. So when saving, we will rename the first file to file 001 underscore invoice.pdf and the second file to file 002 invoice.pdf. This is how they will look. And the next one will be called file 002. Now we have only two attachments here, but if there were more, the next one would be called file 003 and so on. Let's see how to build that. On the very top, we can declare another constant. I'm going to call it file, but you can name it to anything. So let's declare the constant. We'll call it file prefix as a string. And I will assign the value as file. Next, let's declare our counter variables. The first counter will be 1 and we want it to increment by 1 for every attachment. So let's dim that. This will be a long. Let's assign it a value of 0. Now for the next part, let me explain how I want the file name to look. Back to our notepad. If our first counter was 1 and the next was 2 and so on, our file names would start like this. And then file 10, file 11, etc. This is absolutely fine. However, I'm going to be a bit nitpicky out here. This format doesn't look well because the files won't sort correctly. If there are say 11 files, the sorting order will look like this. First, and then file 2, and then file 3. I'm not particularly comfortable with that chronology. Plus, it doesn't look neat. What I personally prefer is this. To achieve this, we need to create a number format which has two leading zeros for single digit numbers and one leading zero for double digit numbers and no leading zeros for triple digit numbers. Let's see how to do that in VBA. It's really quite simple. We will convert the number to a string and format it in a special way. So let's declare another counter variable, but this time we'll declare it as a string. Let's go inside our for loop. For each attachment, let's increment the counter by 1 before we assign the attachment name. So we'll say L counter again and add an increment of 1. Now that we have our counter ready, let's format it so that it has leading zeros. We can use the format function here and assign the result to our S counter or a string counter variable. We'll call the format function. Let's pass this L counter variable, comma, and now let's tell the function what format we want to use. We will use the 000 format. So double quotes, 3 zeros, close double quotes, close the bracket. There, it's that simple. Now let's add the new file constant and counter to the start of our attachment name. So we're going to come down here. Let's put in another ampersand. First, we'll add this file prefix here. Copy, paste this down here. And next, we'll add the value of our string counter variable. So another ampersand and copy this over. And let's also add a little underscore. And that's it. Except for my rant about the formatting of the counter variable, it's not that much more of code. Let's create a new button for this. I'm going to copy this. Drag this down. Change the assignment of the macro. Call the demo2 macro. Click OK. Change the text on the button. Change this to 2. That's it. We'll just quickly inspect the out folder. So nothing's saved here. That's good. And my in folder has the only one Outlook message out there. Good. Let's run this and see if we get any error. Done. Great. It's done running. Let's go to the out folder. Looks like it ran well. So we can see both the invoices are saved this time. And we've got a file prefix and our counter variable at the start of the file name. So looks like this ran okay. I do want to run this again with more email messages and attachments that are over 10 in number. Let's do that. I'm just going to paste in some more email messages here. These are the same emails that we ran in our demo 1, plus our email message with the duplicate file names. Let's just delete the extracted attachments as well. Delete these off. Cool. Let's run code 2 now. We get done again. We can see all the attachments have been neatly saved, and we can see our counter working well, especially after the 10th file attachment. So you go to file 10, 11, etc., etc. So that ran well as well. All in all, good. Macro runs well as is, and you can actually exit the video here and have a fully functioning macro ready. The code is available on our website. However, in a professional environment, it will be better to add some error handling to this macro. First of all, if the folders in and out don't exist, we should alert the user. Secondly, if there are files existing in the out folder from the previous run, we should alert the user as well. Thirdly, if the user places a regular file which is not an Outlook message, this macro will throw an error. We need to check for that as well. And fourthly, and the most useful final piece, is that we need some sort of a report of which files were extracted from which emails so that we can keep a track of how the job ran. Okay, let's build this in the next section. Let's create a new module now. We'll rename this to demo 3. Let's paste over our code from section 2. We'll just rename this stuff to demo 3 now. Okay, now let's add our error handlers. Let's first check if the subfolder in exists or not. We can use the folder exists method, but we got to use the reverse of it. That is, if the folder doesn't exist, then we give the user a message and exit the sub. So if not, we'll use the folder exists method. Which folder? We are looking for the in folder. Close the if. So if it doesn't exist, we'll basically just exit the sub. Before we do that, we'll set our application.screenUpdating to true. Copy this and write exit sub. Let's type in an elaborate message for the user as well. We will tell the user which folder doesn't exist and instruct them what to do next. I'm just going to paste in our message out here. It's quite big and elaborate, but what it does is just alerts the user. You can find this code on our website. I do not really want to get into building this message because that's not really the purpose of this video. But let's just see how this message actually looks. So we can come to our folder path and delete the in folder. So let's run this macro and see what we get. So this is how the message would look. It just says that the folder in doesn't exist in the current directory. For this macro to work, please first create a folder called in this directory, and next place your Outlook messages there. Thanks. Okay, and the rest of the macro does not run. Let's move on to the error handler for the out folder. Now for the out folder, we could do the exact same thing as above. But logically, we don't actually need the user to have an out folder created. If it's not there, we can just create one through the code and move on. So we'll use the same if statement. Close the if. And we will change this to the constant for our out folder. Let's use the create folder method to create a new folder. You can see that the file system object library actually has a lot of handy methods. Let's go fso.create folder. We want to create the out subfolder. Copy this and paste it here. Great, that's it. We'll test this when we run the macro at the end. Let's move on to the next part. We want to display our report on the main sheet in the columns G to I. So first, let's clear the contents in these three columns. First, we can assign a code name to the sheet 1. So come here and click on sheet 1. Come to name, and we'll call this WS main. Now we can directly access methods of this worksheet without actually declaring this as a separate worksheet. So let's say WS main. We'll choose the range object, columns G to I, and clear the entire contents. Next, we'll add some column headers. I'm just going to paste these in to speed up the video. Column G will have the column name Outlook message name. Column H will have the column name Outlook attachment name. And column I will have the header Outlook status. Next, let's create a variable for the out subfolder as well so that we can access its methods and properties. We'll do the same thing what we did for the in folder. Copy this, paste it here, change it to out, and we'll set it as well. Copy this, paste it here, change this to out, change this to out. Next, let's check if there are any files placed in the in folder. If there are no files, then there's really nothing to loop over. We'll alert the user and exit the sub. For this, we will use the file count property. So if choose the files connection, count property. If there are 0 files in here, then we exit the sub. First, close the if statement, and we'll set the application.screenUpdating to true and exit the sub. But let's put in a fancy message here as well. I'm just going to paste in the message out here. I don't want to deep dive into actually creating this message. Just to speed up this video, we will see what this message actually looks like when we run through our macro at the end. Next, if there are existing files in the Outlook folder, we don't want to run the macro. There might be files there from the previous run. So let's check for that and alert the user. We will use the same files count property. Just going to copy this, close the if. This time we're checking the out folder. And this time we want to check if there are more than 0 files in that folder. So if it's not equal to 0, let's copy the exit sub part out here as well and paste in a fancy message. Moving on to the next part. We will be making notes out here in columns G to I. In order to do that, we need to find the last row of the last note that we have made and then offset it by 1 so that we come to the next blank cell and put in our new notes. So let's declare a variable to hold the last row. Now let's go to our loop. If the file is not an Outlook message, we will skip it and move on to the next file. Note, we won't be exiting the sub here. Once the folder checks are done, I personally like to run the macro over all the files and get back all the errors and address them in one go instead of the macro stopping each time an error is found. So if the file extension is not MSG, the file name. So what we are saying here is if the last three letters of the file extension is not MSG, then let's close the if. We will skip the logic and go to the next file. Go to, we'll just create a line reference here. So let's add the code for this line reference. We will skip over all of this. And just before we loop over to the next file item, we will define what happens. First, we will find the last row and move down one row or offset one row to write our notes. We will use the current region.rows.count property. So in this code, we've just found the last row. We will offset it when we're actually assigning the values. Let's do that now. So column G has the file name. So now let's offset it by 1 so that we move on to the next row. So this is the name of the file. Column H contains attachment names, but in this case, these files will not be Outlook messages, so they won't have any attachment names, and we will leave this column as blank. And in column I, which is the status column, we will note that the file wasn't an Outlook message. So now let's move further in the loop. After we are done saving each attachment, let's make some notes there as well. We will use the same logic as out here, but we'll just assign different values. Column G will still contain the file name. Column H will contain the attachment name. So let's delete this and use the name property. And the status will just say completed. That looks good. But what if there is an email with no attachments? The code will skip over this loop, but we still need to make a note of that file. So let's do that as well. So if the count of attachments in the mail item is 0, close the if, use the same logic as here. Column G will still be the file name. Column H will have no attachment name, so we'll leave it as blank. And for the status message, we will just say no attachments were found. Okay, so once we've reached this part, we need to now move directly to the next file and not trigger this logic for no Outlook messages. So let's add a new line reference. And add the reference so that it skips this above logic. Okay, and for the last part of the code, let's resize columns G to I to fit the size of the notes. And we'll use auto fit. That's it for the code. Let's create a button for it. Assign it to the new macro. And change the text. Okay. Let's run the entire macro as is first, and then we will run it individually to check if each error handler works or not. I'm going to create the in folder again. and paste in a few emails. Let's have a look at the emails in the folder. In addition to emails with attachments, we also have a PDF file here. Remember, we have some logic that will make a note of that. There is also one email in here that has no attachments. We will also make a note for that. Let's close this. Okay, let's run this code and see if everything works well. Looks like there's an error. Let's debug and see what it is. I think I've used the wrong property out here. Let's correct that now. It should be file name, not just name. Okay. Instead of stopping this macro, I'm gonna run it and let it continue. Okay, done. That's it. Looks like everything ran well. However, I'm just going to delete off the Outlook messages that were extracted. And just rerun this macro once again because the previous run had a bug in it. So let's run the code 3 again. Done. Okay, so this run was smooth and the Outlook attachments seem to have extracted fine. We can see our notes in column G2I. There was one file with no attachments. We have made a note of that. We have also made a note of the PDF file. We have already checked the error handler for the in folder. So let's just check if the error handler for the Outlook folder works or not. What we will do is let's rerun this macro again, but this time there are files extracted here already. I'm not deleting these off. We should get a message that we need to delete these files before running the macro for the next time. Let's run this macro. And yes, we get a message. It says there can be no files in the out folder. Please empty the folder and rerun the macro. Thanks. Okay. So that part works. Now let's delete the out folder completely and run the macro. We should not get an error message this time. Instead, the macro should run, create the out folder, and extract all the attachments in there. So let's see if that works fine. We get our done. Our notes have been made. And there, our out folder has been created as well. And I guess that's it. Fantastic. That's our fully functioning macro now. Great. And that's it for this video. As stated in the description of this video, this is one of the most useful macros that I've built and is a real-time saver. You can build this for yourself or build it for a team member who may benefit from it. Hope you like this video. If you feel that this video added some value and would like to see more content like this, please do subscribe to our channel. Great. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.